The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to Geospatial Webinar Series, a production of Directions Magazine and Earth Imaging Journal. Today's webinar is entitled The City of Vancouver Powers an Integrated Approach to Municipal Government Infrastructure Management. Hello, my name is Joe Francica. I am the Editor-in-Chief of Directions Magazine and the Vice Publisher of the Directions Media Publishing Group. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, and I'm assisted by our Executive Webinar Producer, Nora Parker. We're delighted to be working once again with Pitney Bowes Software, the sponsor of today's webinar. And today we're going to be telling you about a new partnership between Pitney Bowes and Autodesk, and their joint customer, the City of Vancouver, will help to more fully explain how they are working with the technologies of both of those companies. So as you can see on the map that will be coming up shortly on your screen, we once again have a very large international audience who have registered for today's webinar. Nearly 400 people have registered, representing over 25 countries. We're confident today's webinar will provide really valuable insights in how the City of Vancouver is utilizing a variety of geospatial technologies to support both economic development and conservation efforts within the city. What I want to do now is first go over a few housekeeping details. If you've not joined us for one of our webinars before, we'll be taking a few polls. So when you least expect it, we'll be hitting you with some very deep and insightful questions for which we will require your most thoughtful response. We do encourage you to ask questions, and you may do this really at any time during the webinar. So to send a question our way, you'll see a small control panel in the upper right hand of your screen. This is the section appropriately enough called Questions. You can open that dialog box at any time, and you may do this throughout the webinar. We'll respond to as many of the questions that you have and present to us in a timely fashion during the Q&A session. However, whatever questions we do not field during the allotted time, we will be sure to answer after the webinar via email, so please don't hesitate to submit your questions. And in the event that you are unexpectedly struck by a solar flare today, and if you have any other technical difficulties, please use the same interface that you used to ask the question. Send us a message about your issue. We'll try to solve whatever technical difficulties you may have and get that fixed. Now, in addition, today's webinar will be recorded, and all registrants and attendees will soon receive an email with instructions on how to view the webinar on demand. So please, feel free to understand that you'll be getting a link to see this very shortly. We also have put in our chat window, if you haven't already noticed it, the link to the bios of today's presenters, as well as a link to the slides. So we've got plenty of resources for you to dig into, so notice that we'll be chatting with you all throughout the webinar and giving you some of those links and resources that you can use in the future. We'd like to remind you to take advantage of all that we have to offer at Directions Magazine. We do a number of webinars every month. You can find out more details at geospatialwebinars.com. Please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter at directionsmag.com/subscriptions. And if you're in the DC area, or if you're not, and you'd like to come to our Location Intelligence Conference, this is our yearly international event this year in Washington, DC, that will be held in conjunction with the Oracle Spatial Users Conference. We've got a great agenda lined up for you this year, and we hope we'll see you in DC later this May. All right, so let's take a brief look at the agenda. You've heard from me already. We're going to have an overview of the Pitney Bowes and Autodesk partnership, and then go into our case study today with the City of Vancouver, and then wrap up with our Q&A session at the end. But first, let's go right into our first poll, and what we'd like you to do is just reflect a minute on the question we have at hand here, which is, if you're attending and you're with a municipality, we'd like to find out a little bit about the size of your municipality. So I'm going to launch the poll at this point. Please do let us know what category you fit into, and this will help our presenters get a kind of a better idea where you're coming from and the types of problems you may have with a municipality of your size. So give us some feedback. Let us know how it is, and then I'm going to share the results of the poll with everybody here in just a few minutes. Well, it's about 75% of you have voted. Just I'll hold the poll open just a minute or two longer, just a second or two longer, just to give everybody a chance once more. Great. Thanks very much for visiting with us and taking the time to respond. I'm going to close the poll and share the results with everybody. It looks like we've got, although a fair number of people who are with municipalities, a fair number of you that are not. So we welcome all of you here with us today. It looks like most of you are with a municipality that are under that, but actually a pretty good even mix, so that's good as well. So again, thanks very much for responding to the first poll, and we're going to continue with our presentation. So it's my pleasure to introduce two gentlemen that will take us through the first part of today's webinar. Dr. Ahmed Abukhater is the Global Director of Product Management at Pitney Software, who for the last decade has held a variety of executive roles in the U.S. and overseas. He's a noted expert in the areas including GIS solutions and strategic marketing and planning, community development, environmental science, and sustainable development, as well as conflict resolution. He holds a PhD in community and regional planning from the University of Texas at Austin and a master's degree in urban planning from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Also joining us is Justin Lokitz. He's a senior product manager at Autodesk, and he's responsible for infrastructure modeling, cloud, and mobile products. Prior to working at Autodesk, Justin spent a decade working with companies with a geospatial focus like Urdas and Oracle, where he worked on engineering, product management, and the sales engineering team. Today, Justin is excited as ever about the prospect of geospatial and design technologies and feels we've entered a new paradigm with 3D and possibly 4D. And when Justin is not in his paid position, he spends some time enjoying beer, and he's promised us brewing beer, and he's promised us a free sample at the end. So welcome to both of you. Ahmed, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by thanking you again for your time. We are really excited about this partnership, and we hope that you are as well. This partnership basically is formed to respond to the various business needs of the government, mining, and transportation sectors in the short term. But as we move down the road, we plan to verticalize our combined offerings to serve specific industry solution needs. And today, we will be focusing primarily on the municipal and local government sector. From our experience, we realized that on average, it takes about 7 to 10 years from the time any project is designed to the time it is built. And this gap is a result of different things, including extensive and usually long permitting and approval process, and the challenge of involving all interested and impacted stakeholders in that process, and of course not to mention the technology limitation, among other things. We decided to enter into this partnership not only because of our mutual realization as Pitney Software and as Autodesk of the value that we can bring together to the industry, but also because our customers need it today to be able to manage the whole project life cycle and expedite the process. So we've seen an increasing demand for us to combine our technology together and deliver a complete and end-to-end solution to support government and infrastructure business workflows. This means combining the analytical, computational, and strategic capabilities of Pitney Software with Autodesk's operational and mapping capabilities, particularly the visualization and design elements. And this is because our customers already are doing this today. And the City of Vancouver is just one example. And it just makes perfect sense for us to leverage both of our strengths in these various aspects. This will help you in local government become more productive and efficient in managing your location intelligent assets and also driving a more informed and collaborative decision-making process across different components of the project life cycle that you can see on the screen, including the planning, the designing, the building, and even all the way to managing the project. Next, please. And in all of these components of the project lifecycle, we need to be able to conduct analysis and visualize results, and of course share them with a wider audience, clients and citizens, and to be able to collaborate and drive actionable intelligence. Next. For our customers, this is basically 1 + 1 = 3. Individually, Pitney software and Autodesk have the best of breed in terms of products and solutions. But what we are trying to do today here is to provide the best of suite by combining both of our technology solutions that will work with each other and complement one another, as Justin will be showing next. So now I will hand it off to Justin from Autodesk, who will be explaining a little bit more about the partnership itself and what it means to you and the industry at large.
Thanks, Ahmed. So as Ahmed discussed up front, you know, going into this, you look at a company like Autodesk, and many of you may know Autodesk for design, big D type design, right? And design of lots of different things on Earth. But even Autodesk, we look at that with the same perspective, that design of things on Earth, whether they're buildings or infrastructure or anything else, it doesn't just start with a blank sheet of paper. In fact, it takes some upfront planning. Eventually something is designed, and then it's built, and then it's managed. And we've had this view for a long time. As we started to look at this, and as we continued to work with customers like City of Vancouver, what we realized was that, you know, there are plenty of gaps, and not necessarily just gaps in between the plan through managed life cycle here, but things that we weren't really considering. You know, where does the plan come from? You know, where does the strategic planning come from? And down the line, it isn't just about, you know, locating something on Earth, but there's strategic management of different kinds of assets that eventually lead right back to planning. And so if we look at Pitney Bowes, and you know, considering what you're seeing here with Autodesk, and I'll have Joe flip to the next slide. If we look at Pitney Bowes in this life cycle, Pitney Bowes isn't really focused on that big D design. Instead, they're focused on the ends there, right? With tools like MapInfo Pro that really focus on that visioning and policy strategy, and that the upfront analytics to really decide why do something and why do it here. And on the other end, after something is eventually designed and maybe even built, managing those things, and not just managing the location of something on the Earth and maybe even the geometries, but actually looking at and analyzing those things with using strategic asset management tools and even location intelligence that eventually leads it right back into that planning and design life cycle. So these are best of breed tools, but now when you look at the systems overall, you realize, you know, where we had gaps, we really complement each other, and we come up with exactly what Ahmed said, which is a best of suite approach, going all the way from the visioning and planning strategy through planning, through preliminary design and conceptual design, all the way into design, and through the management processes. Together, we're actually able to offer that end-to-end solution that here you'll hear City of Vancouver speak about, and together we really believe that we're offering a solution that, you know, that can't be matched and is really needed by lots of different organizations out there, especially municipal governments. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to City of Vancouver, and I believe Jonathan Mark, and Dan Campbell, who will talk about the phases that they've been working on.
Great, thanks, Justin. Appreciate that. So let me take a brief moment to introduce both Jonathan Mark and Dan Campbell. Jonathan is the City of Vancouver Senior Manager of GIS and CAD Services in the Information Technology Department, having managed the city's corporate GIS environment since 1990. And with recent reorganizations, he and his team are responsible for the city's corporate GIS infrastructure, as well as the van map, topo-based CAD, and 3D implementations for other GIS applications. Jonathan's work with the city has also included responsibility for systems in the health department, property division, and stores. Jonathan has presented many times at RISA and Autodesk University, as well as many other conferences. Prior to joining the city in 1984, Jonathan taught in the Urban Land Economics Division of the Faculty of Commerce at the University of British Columbia and attained a PhD in economics in 1977. Dan is the graphics planner for the City of Vancouver's GIS and CAD Services branch and also the Information Technology Department. He's responsible for coordinating 3D visualization and analysis activities and managing the City of Vancouver's 3D model. He's got a background in planning and urban design, which he is able to apply in the context of GIS and city modeling. Dan has presented also at many conferences on the topic of 3D as it relates to urban development and public participation, including at Autodesk University, MapAsia, and the Ontario Association of Architects. Dan has a degree in fine arts and architecture. So welcome to both of you, and I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan. So Jonathan, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much, Joe. We're pleased to be here today. We're very excited about this partnership, and I'm going to lead off and give you a little bit of an introduction to Vancouver and our GIS implementation, and then turn it over to Dan, who is responsible for the MapInfo and 3D model side of this, and he'll take you through some of our workflows. For those of you who don't know, the City of Vancouver is located on the west coast of Canada with a population of about 600,000 in a fairly good-sized metropolitan area. But physically, we're small, and we have water on 3 sides, so we're pretty confined, and we have a very diverse population. One of the things that distinguishes us from most other municipalities is that we do most of the design and construction of our infrastructure, streets, sewer, water main, things like that, which highlights the importance of needing end-to-end solutions on the infrastructure design and visualization side. And for those of you who managed not to watch any TV in the first quarter of 2010, we were the host to the Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games then, and had a good time having the world here. Our GIS environment's quite mature. We've been in the business a long time, and we have Oracle Spatial at the center of our database, or our GIS environment. We've been users of Autodesk tools, desktop and web products for a long time. And we've also been an extensive user of MapInfo for quite a while. We're best known in some ways for our VanMap application, which is a map guide-based application that was first introduced to staff in 1999. So we've been in the web GIS business for quite a while. There are a number of things which are driving us at the city, and one of them is the Greenest City initiative. This is the direction that the city wants to become the greenest city in the world by 2020, which affects a lot of what we do now, particularly in the areas we're talking about today. We're also replacing a large and old permit processing system, which the tools that we're talking about today will go a long way towards supporting. In a time of reduced budgets, we're consolidating, we're moving to shared services, and staff groups are coming together, and as part of the ongoing processes within the city, we continue to focus more and more on the planning side. I mentioned the budget issues, and those are substantial, and they will keep us on our toes for quite a while, I'm sure. We're also looking for an increased amount of collaboration, public participation in a lower cost way, and again, the tools we're talking about today are really important to that process. The last slide I want to talk about here is just to give you a little bit of a visualization of what our environment looks like. As I said, we've got Oracle Spatial Enterprise Database at the center. We've got Autodesk tools for data viewing and data creation. MapInfo Professional, we have a number of those licenses for people who are taking the data from Oracle Spatial and doing a lot of things with it. We've got infrastructure management using the Hansen software. And we've got a very mature open data site where most of the data from our GIS environment can be downloaded for free in a variety of formats. And finally, and newer to the picture, our infrastructure modeler and 3ds Max, 2 products from Autodesk, which Dan is going to be talking about now, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks, Jonathan. In addition to the business drivers that Jonathan mentioned, there's a lot of outside forces also affecting our workflows and our direction. First of all, it's impossible not to mention BIM. While we're not actively working with BIM content yet, it's hard not to regard it as an asteroid plummeting toward us. It's going to be such a major force. And anything that we're doing now, we have to make sure that in the longer term it will be able to accommodate and work with BIM content efficiently. And as Jonathan mentioned, open data has become very important. While we've been able to release a large portion of our GIS data out there, there is a constant hunger from the public for more and more. And this is specifically true to 3D data. We're working very hard to get all our 3D data out into formats that the public will be able to work with. Also related to 3D is the visualization of complex data. We sometimes had difficulty dealing with things like airspace parcels, split zones, multiple use in a 2D environment. And we struggle with ways of actually making sure that all this data can be made available to the public. And the public wants to participate in our processes in a greater extent. At one point, the public was content for us to come out as experts and present some drawings or some screenshots of what a project or a process would be. Now we have to be able to establish processes where the public will present their own models, their own analysis. We are in the era of the citizen geographer and the citizen 3D modeler. And without doubt, we have to make sure that this data is in a format that's accessible by the greatest number of the public as possible, and that does mean the web. So let me show you how we're responding to some of these forces, specifically in the 3D arena. This slide here begins to show you what our city looks like in 3D, and the challenges we have to actually work with 3D content at the full city scale. Cities are really large, and the title to the slide relates to a lot of Ds. In order to create 3D content, you need a lot of time, 4D, and a lot of money, 5D. I did some very quick calculations, and if I were to model every building in the city, we have about 170,000 of them, at even a minimum level of detail, it would take about 20 minutes per building. Well, extrapolate that across the full city and incorporate time off for vacations and other things, it would take me alone 29 years to model the entire city. And based on my meager public employee salary, that would still, over 29 years, work out to almost $2.5 million. I don't think that would be acceptable to most cities or most city governments as a viable process. So rather than 2.5 million, we begin to look at the whole idea of 2.5D data as the way of generating 3D content. And this 2.5D data is not only the solution to creating that content, but it also benefits our overall workflow with other content as well. The diagram you're seeing here can be seen as a continuum, but initially it started out with a split between our planning department that worked primarily with MapInfo Professional and our engineering group who worked more with Autodesk Map 3D. And we began to work out workflows that were quite efficient in terms of file transfers. But then we realized the fact with having Oracle Spatial as our center of our data structure that we can actually send out the data from that directly. And we began to look at the whole idea that there is this ongoing flow of the data. And we would want to create the 3D data, but in many cases when we're working with more traditional modeling tools like 3ds Max or SketchUp, it would be the end of the road once we created that 3D data. It was very pretty models, but it lacked the actual intelligence that would allow us to do more work with them. And now we're actually working towards this continuum where we're able to actually enrich data within the 3D environment and then send it back into our workflows so that other users, such as those working with MapInfo Professional, can continue to work with it. So let's start at looking at this whole process with our 2D building footprints in MapInfo Professional. What you're seeing here is one of Vancouver's neighborhoods. This is the Kitsilano neighborhood. And these are just standard 2D building footprints. In this case, the building footprints were actually generated from LiDAR. And we were lucky enough that the data attached to it includes information about building height and as well information about roof slope and other aspects. And we would work in MapInfo Professional doing our standard GIS in a 2D environment work and also use it to merge in other data such as zoning information, land use, that we can attach to these 2D building footprints. But what's interesting about the process is that we can also take these exact same data sets and visualize them in 3D using Autodesk Infrastructure Modeler. So in this slide, you're seeing the same Kitsilano neighborhood, but because of the LiDAR-derived information, the buildings have been extruded up from the footprints and the appropriate roof slopes added as well. As you can see, for some of the smaller buildings, they have the appropriate pitched roofs defining the residential character. Well, this is pretty exciting for us. One data set and the ability to see them in 2D in MapInfo and 3D in Autodesk Infrastructure Modeler. And as I was saying that before, we're no longer trapped when we reach this 3D end of the process. It is not an end. We can take this data and send it back into our workflow. So let's see how these footprints look in Autodesk Map 3D. And at this point, we have flexibility in our workflow, and it really depends on how comfortable people are in terms of working with different applications. And we have, in this case, I've actually attached to the Autodesk Infrastructure Modeler SQLite database directly in Map 3D and brought in the building footprints once again. Since the LiDAR that we're working with was fairly coarse, about a 1 meter resolution, it did not capture all the details of the building footprints that would be ideal for more adventurous renderings or more detailed analysis. So what we've done is brought in our orthophoto layer and use that as reference and use the robust drawing tools in Map 3D to add more detail to the buildings. So I've gone through and traced it more accurately where there's recesses in the building footprint, where there's projections for balconies, and I've even added in some details about mechanical penthouses just to add that extra level of detail to the buildings, and even at the most basic level begin to more accurately represent what's actually there. So in a simple extruded building footprint format, the characters there so people can actually understand and recognize landmarks within their buildings. So now let's take this same set back into Infrastructure Modeler. And at this point, this is where what we're pretty much boundaries between what is visualization, what is GIS, what is 2D, what is 3D begin to break down. Because here's the data set, and I'm actually doing a very simple thematic rendering within Infrastructure Modeler, in this case just based on building area, so you can see the different areas based on color. This is pretty exciting stuff for us. And once we've gone through the process of enriching the data by working with both Infrastructure Modeler and Map 3D, we can take these same building footprints back into MapInfo Professional once again. And in this slide, once again, we're back to the 2D view of our Kitsilano neighborhood. And what I've done is just gone ahead and done the same thematic query on the building footprints as I did in Infrastructure Modeler. So now we have the flexibility of taking one data set, looking at them in both 2D and 3D, and it would really depend upon what is the specific need of this project, what is the audience that will be working with this data, what is the audience that will be viewing the data. It gives us the flexibility to choose which tool to apply and how to work with the data and whether to choose to work in 2D or 3D accordingly. As customers, we're hoping to get a lot out of this new strategic partnership between Pitney Bowes and Autodesk. I guess most importantly to us, there's been some validation of our existing GIS environment. We just pretty much organically started working with MapInfo Pro and Map3D, found good ways of having workflow between them, and have been quite happy. Now that we know that this partnership is happening, we expect a lot of improvements with regards to interoperability and workflow. We know that things can happen to make it even easier than it is now. And given that we're such a mixed environment with a range of different skill levels, work objectives, hardware, it will be nice to have this flexibility of workflow in terms of choosing, is this a task that's best accomplished in MapInfo Pro, or is this something that should be done in Map3D, and have this flow of data back and forth. And I guess it will be nice now that will be more an opportunity for Autodesk and Pitney Bowes to actually focus in on the specific strengths of their products rather than trying to just duplicate the same functionality across the board. And a great benefit to us will be a further reduction in the number of data sets we need to work with. We want things to be simpler, faster, easier, and more powerful.
Well, great. Thanks very much, Dan. That's fantastic. And at this point, what I'd like to do is bring Justin back into the conversation, and he'll continue with the discussion of the alliance and how that's going to benefit some customers.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so it was a great overview by Jonathan and Dan there. And really just to come back to the original point here, that led into that discussion about what City of Vancouver is doing is just bringing back this graphic and again, sort of the overview of why we're doing what we're doing and really why it makes sense. Just like Dan and Jonathan talked about, when it comes to municipal governments and plenty of other organizations around the world, there are those goals. There are those goals that they face every day, and they use data to help them, achieve those goals, and data and tools, right? And here you'll see that what we're doing, working together, is bringing together what we think is the best suite of tools, whether they are design tools or preliminary design tools and 3D visualization tools, or deep analytic tools and deep analytic solutions, bringing those things together so that we can provide, not only seamless access to less data sets, but actually the functionality and efficiency where needed to, deliver the kinds of things that are needed to achieve those goals. And what you'll see, and I think in this next slide, what you'll see is, where those tools come into play might be, this kind of example and the kind of thing that Dan just talked about. MapInfo potentially being used for analyzing areas for development. Autodesk Infrastructure Modeler being able to create and communicate the intent using 3D models and using real 3D intelligence to do that. And something like AutoCAD Map3D, not only to manage the data using an AutoCAD tool, but being able to publish preliminary designs and documentation using that same AutoCAD tool, whereby it goes through, design, potentially more build, and eventually to managing all the way back to planning. So with that, I'll hand it right back off to Ahmed, and I believe Ahmed will take us on home.
Great. Well, thanks, Justin. Ahmed, I'll let you take over, but I did want to remind the audience that if you've got any questions, please ask them at this time. Put them in the chat window, and like I said, we're coming up to the Q&A session. Yes, Ahmed, let's hear about some of the key business drivers.
Thanks, Joe and Justin. So yeah, as we have seen from the City of Vancouver example and what Justin has just presented, there are a lot of benefits for this partnership, including providing an end-to-end solution of data and business workflow management. You can solve business problems more easily by being able to do more with less resources. You can conduct on-the-fly analysis and scenario generation with the ability to visualize results in both two-dimensional and three-dimensional environments. You can share and collaborate with other departments and other stakeholders. So instead of having multiple data sets that's replicated in different parts of the organization, you will have a centralized data repository and centralized operation and workflow management system. So we can get rid of the problem of stranded data and facilitate a smooth transboundary data flow across different solutions while eliminating the organizational silos at the same time. So you can manage your community assets and large amounts of data and requests from the public and establish this bidirectional channels of communications with your community. So again, the idea is to offer you, our customers and our users, a complete set of capabilities that are complementary and compatible in a single solution bundle with more accurate data, better analytical and visualization tools, and a common operating picture, and being able to bring all of these aspects to life. And the bottom line for us and you as well is to be able to achieve economically viable, environmentally sound and sustainable, and socially equitable communities. Next. So who might benefit from this partnership? We see this partnership as a core element in the AEC industry today, including the planning and economic development departments in local governments, the strategic planners and site designers and architects, of course the IT and the GIS department, also for emergency management, emergency planning, and asset and infrastructure management applications, and public works divisions. Next. Next, please. Okay. So let's take a look at a simple example of what this might look like for what we call a local government solution architecture. Basically, we recognize that there are two breeds of customers or users in the local government space today, and therefore two sets of solutions. The people who plan and assess or evaluate, on one hand, those are the planning officers, and the people who communicate and are communicated to, the city executives and the general public. So there are basically two business functions or two tiers that we see today that emerge here. First, planning, which includes design proposals, and two, communicating and sharing of these plans across various stakeholders using web mapping applications and solutions. So for the first tier, which is the planning and assessment of various planning and design proposals, planners need to conduct data management, business analysis, and concept reviews, and these can be achieved by offering the analytical and evaluation tools of MI Pro and Map 3D to generate analysis and author maps, as the City of Vancouver just demonstrated. And for the second tier, which is sharing and communication of information and critical information and data, we'll be offering Stratus, which is a web mapping application, 2D for sharing information and location intelligence assets, and Project Galileo, which is a 3D solution from Autodesk. Both of these applications give you the ability to share information with your communities, whether in two-dimensional or three-dimensional environments, and be able to provide a platform for dissemination of critical community data that is requested by the public. So again, this is really an exciting time for us, and we hope you are able to get a glimpse of what this partnership is all about. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ahmed. That was a great summary of what the two companies can do together. right now that takes us up to our second poll, and what we're asking here is, based on what you've heard today, what are the most beneficial aspects of the technology solution? So take a minute to review those options, and at this point I'm going to open our poll and let you have a chance to give us some feedback on what you think you've heard today and what you think would be most beneficial to you. So just take a moment, reflect on the presentation we provided you. After we go through this poll, we're going to go right into our Q&A session, and it looks like we've certainly got a number of questions coming in. And we will spend some time. We've got about 20 minutes, a little less than 20 minutes to take your questions. And so please put them in the chat window. We'll get to as many of them as we can by the top of the hour. So most of you have given us some feedback. We appreciate that. And I'll keep it open for just a few more seconds if you'd be kind enough to just give us some indication of where you think you would most benefit by the technology solutions. All right, great. Again, we thanks very much for you giving us the time today. Thanks for that input. I'm going to share the results. It looks like the majority of you, 47%, are interested in data integration and workflow management. Almost an equal number, 43%, are looking at combining analysis and visualization, and an equal number of you said end-to-end business solutions as well as combining 2D and 3D, which I think was most adequately done by Jonathan and Dan today. So great. Appreciate that feedback. What I want to do now is I'm going to hide that poll from everybody and just show you a few of the resources, other pieces of information that you can take away from today's webinar. If you've got questions for Pitney Bowes, you can send an email to either Ahmed, whose email is listed on the screen, or Jessica Krukowski. We'll leave these email addresses up there for a few minutes, as well as the URL at the Pitney Bowes software website where you can find that additional product information. If you have specific questions for Autodesk, please direct them to Justin Lokitz. Again, his email address is on the screen, as well as the URL for the Autodesk information. Again, the webinar will be recorded. All of this information will be provided to you in an email. You can watch it again on demand. We've put some of these links already into the chat window. You can probably scroll back up and see if you can get them. All right, this brings us up to our Q&A session, and as I said, we've got a number of things that a number of questions that have come in. So first question is, can you provide the URL of the Open Data GeoPortal? The answer to that is if you've got, we'll put that in the chat window too, but the answer is vancouver.ca/data. So we'll get that out to you, include that in the resources as well. All right, so our next question, did the city give a thought to using an object-oriented image classification software like eCognition to generate building footprints from the ortho photo? So maybe Dan, you may want to take that one.
Certainly. We were lucky enough with our LiDAR to have it come with the building footprints and all the height attributes and roof information already calculated. So we didn't have to actually make that decision about looking at different ways of getting at the data. But I do know that we are in this ongoing quest to get ever more precise, accurate 3D information, and I'm certain in the future that we'll be looking at different techniques, including the one in question, to most efficiently get at our 3D data. And because right now we do have sort of a split between very, very detailed 3D building footprints in our downtown core as opposed to the 2.5D generated for the full city. And it's a balancing act, I think, that we have to work in terms of what can we actually produce efficiently and economically.
Right, and I don't know if any of you wanted to comment on the poll we just did. It seemed like there was certainly a lot of interest in combining 2D and 3D data, and of course about the integration of the workflow. So, you know, that seems to be a large part of it, and I think, Dan, you described that very well. I don't know if any of you want to comment on the fact that there were so many people interested, easily a third of the people interested in the 2D and of course the integration workflow.
Yeah, so this is Justin. I'd say, from an Autodesk perspective, we see a lot of that, and the reason is because there's a context for both, right? And there's a reason for both. On one hand, if you look at a 2D 2D map, an overview map, think about things like tracing, and think about things like heat maps, and that are really useful for people who need to see a broad overview of what's going on. It could be a network trace of from a road or utility perspective, for instance. And what better way to actually look at that than actually looking at the 2D version of that network? It really gives you sort of the graph that you're needing. And again, same sort of thing with looking at heat maps and buffers and other things, understanding how something affects something else, really in a broad geographic context. 2D is terrific for that. At the same time, 3D, it really happens to be the best way from our perspective, and it looks like Dan is doing something very similar there in the City of Vancouver. The best way of explaining intent for something, right? Really getting people into the picture. Not everyone understands 2D. Not everyone looks at a map and understands, how things are affected in a buffer or what a building looks like, from a 2D top-down perspective. But when you show them 3D and you show them, what the building may look like, what the environments may look like, the surroundings, and how that might affect their everyday lives, all of a sudden they've got the context they may need, and they see themselves in that picture, and it goes a long way, right? So from our perspective, we see a lot of that. Both are needed, and both are used in lots of different processes.
Right.
If I could just add one point to that.
Yeah.
This is Dan. That for the longest time, we worked in both 2D and 3D, and it was the challenge and the drain on the resources that was required to manage these two separate data sets. And I think the big shift for us is the fact that now we're looking at, in most cases, a single data set, and that is a big change.
Well, Dan, let me pick up on that, because one of the questions we have is, 2D and 3D is interesting for visualization, at least certainly the 3D aspect of it, but what are the types of analyses that you're conducting on the 3D data versus what you couldn't do perhaps on the 2D side?
Yeah, well, this is Ahmed. Sorry. Just to comment on this, the 2D and 3D data actually, they're used for two different purposes. Let's take, for example, the 2D data and the 2D analysis. You can do site analysis, or what we call suitability analysis. You can find out, for example, the best locations for a particular land use in the city. Let's say low-density residential development or commercial development. You can conduct that kind of analysis. You can rank your preference from 1 to 10 based on your criteria that you can define. Vicinity to central business district, vicinity to transportation or public transportation, vicinity to community assets, parks, recreational areas, shopping areas, etc. And you can weigh that. You can do really intelligent, what we call science-based or evidence-based analysis. You can create hotspot maps, heat maps, and what we call also location allocation. You can look at density of roads, density of a particular phenomenon. So that's on the 2D, or the two-dimensional aspect. On the 3D part of the equation here, you can do a lot more and bring the data to life. You can do shadow analysis, for example, the orientation of the building, or particular land uses or particular functions inside the building. How do you allocate those locations? How do you orient the building so you can receive either the most amount of sun or the least amount of sun based on the function or the use of that particular space. You can do view shed analysis, right? You can look from a particular building, and some of these designs or uses of particular buildings, they're more interested in the view, like it's a resort, you want it to have a nice view. So you can do this kind of analysis. You can also design the building from, historically we have been, as architects or city planners, designing the building from inside out without taking into account most of the time the externalities, the impact of the surrounding area on that particular building. So instead of doing that, we can actually combine the inside-out design with an outside-in design philosophy or approach. So that's basically the difference between the 2D and 3D analysis.
Okay, great, Ahmed. Dan, do you want to add anything to that, or maybe what you do in particular?
Well, the one point I would add about a change in how we're actually working with 3D now is that there has never really been the same limitation when you're working in a 2D environment with regards to context. If I wanted to do a 2D thematic map of the full city, it's not a big deal. It has been a big deal to work at the city scale in 3D. The limitations of software and hardware have meant that when there is 3D analysis, it's usually not been done well at anything beyond a neighborhood scale because the tools were not there to accommodate it. And I think that's a big shift with something like Infrastructure Modeler, is suddenly there are decisions that need to be made at the city scale, and you're actually seeing and working with the full city at that scale as well.
Yeah, and you, I think, touched on something because we had a question very specifically about, is there anything important in terms of a technical requirement for a successful 3D modeling of an urban area? So it sounds like the combination of tools that you're using was one of those technical things that you found, it worked, and it's working well now. Is that true?
That is true. It obviously, one of the bigger differences is that we need to work with much simpler geometry than we would with a standard full-blown 3D application such as 3ds Max. But that does not mean that in certain circumstances that you cannot take content that's created in another application like that and bring it into an Infrastructure Modeler. That is a kind of a balancing act that when you get into city modeling is how much detail is enough, how much geometry is necessary for a building to become identifiable, to be recognized as a landmark, yet not so large as to start to make it difficult to work with.
Right, right. And how well is it perceived, either by city management or the public at large? Are they comfortable with looking at the 3D visualization aspects? What's your situation like with the upper management folks?
I think everybody is much. People, as Justin noted, people understand 3D, so it is always the inroad to sometimes very complex concepts, because you are giving them a framework that they're comfortable and familiar with to start working with right away. And I think it's the communications aspect of 3D that is the most important.
Right, right. And this is either for Ahmed or maybe Justin. Can you maybe restate, probably I guess for Ahmed, can you restate MapInfo's capabilities that are maybe not found in Map 3D, and how you're taking that 3D data back and forth and working for it in the thematic sense? Oh, do we lose Ahmed there?
Yes. That's a good question. So MapInfo is our desktop GIS. It has lots of analytical and computational capabilities. You can view the map, look at the data, consume the data, establish relationships on a spatial dimension, and you can look at the two-dimensional aspects of the analysis. You can conduct analysis on the fly. You can do your own formulas. You can do insights and drive insights by looking at the data behind the map. So that's the intelligence aspect of the location intelligence modules that we have. And so you can basically create whatever analysis you want. You can combine that analysis that you created and overlay it with different layers. There'll be transportation network, or the impact, for example, of one of the applications. You can do the impact of wildfire on a community, trying to find out where the best location for you to locate particular land use or particular development, considering those risks in the community. You can do risk analysis, knowing where the fire or wildfire would most likely to happen in the future, or some other natural hazard like floodplain areas. You want to avoid those. So all of this science-based analysis, you can conduct using MI Pro for our desktop GIS. For 3D, as I mentioned, it gets a little tricky. We basically, that's where the combination of our technology and Autodesk technology comes to life, and the value of combining both. Because you can take that site or that analysis that you conducted and start honing in on a particular site or a particular parcel and zoom in on it and try to design it in 3D using Autodesk capability. And that's where we see both of our software talk to each other and stitched to each other within that not just a single point solution, but a comprehensive and solid offering that caters to the whole business process end to end.
Great, and I'm going to ask a rather basic question here because someone did ask it, and I'm going to ask it kind of as a two-part question. First of all, many of our listeners may not be familiar with what BIM is, and just maybe somebody can give a basic definition. But also in that context, is BIM is that concept going to be extended to indoor, below ground, the whole infrastructure of a building in particular? So I'll ask that. It's kind of a broad question, but maybe help to refresh everybody's mind as to what that entails.
Is that a question specific for Justin or anyone?
Well, Justin, go ahead and take that. Yeah, I'll give it
Sure.
to you. I'll
Sure.
toss that football to your end.
Sure. So you know, BIM. I'm not sure everyone knows what that stands for. It's Building Information Modeling, and actually the acronym started from actually building, right? Actual buildings with and building tools, and the noun buildings. It actually has turned into something. It's turned into something else, which is the building of anything, right? The building of anything on Earth, and not just buildings, including infrastructure and utilities and everything else. And the idea around it is you know, BIM is really about it's not the technology as much as it is the process of that whole plan through designing and eventually maybe, you know, building as in the verb, and managing some kind of infrastructure or architecture or whatever it may be. I think the question was, does it go inside and underground? Well, the first answer is yes. I mean, actually, from the standpoint of inside, in fact, it started with inside. It started with buildings. And actually even expanding on what Ahmed and Dan just covered, if you think about a city model that Dan showed, one thing you can actually do even today is in that city model you may have a lot of really, you know, great block models that make up the generalized look of the city. You may even have flown LiDAR to get the detailed shells of the city, and maybe you even have some oblique imagery and street side imagery to put facades on those. It makes it look really real. But what happens if you don't just want to see things from the outside, but you actually want to go into the new building that you're designing and look out from the inside? And so that's another capability and just a part of this whole thing, which is, you know, based on what you may be driving to from a GIS standpoint and an analytics standpoint that really MapInfo does so well, at some point you may want to zone in on that specific site and have a model that you're not only looking at from the outside, but you're taking a look from the inside to the outside, and that's something that can handle. Same thing with underground, you know, underground utilities. It's something that we're working on together, whereby it's not just, you know, analyzing things and doing network analysis and those kinds of things of an underground utility, but potentially even visualizing those things and visualizing how they actually interact with the other things around them in 2D and 3D.
Great. Well, thanks, Justin. And we are at the top of the hour, so we've kind of run out of time for any additional questions, but we wanted to thank everybody for staying with us, and as we promised that we were going to finish on time today and want to honor your time by finishing at the top of the hour. So I want to remind everybody about a few things. I think we had a great discussion today I think 2D and 3D visualization, but also the analysis is quite fascinating. It's coming on rapidly, and many people with these combined tools that we heard about today from Autodesk and Pitney Bowes will help you do that and complete that workflow. And just as a bit of a reminder, we're going to have representatives from both companies at our Location Intelligence Conference this coming May in 3 weeks here, in particular being that we have Location Intelligence combined with your Spatial event. But if you're in the DC area, we would love to have you stop by. Also want to remind you about our upcoming webinars. We've got two in the 2 coming weeks. That's noted there on the bottom of your screen. And once again, this is being recorded, so you will receive an email probably within 1 or 2 days with a link that you can view this on demand. Once again, thank everybody for joining us. We hope you'll join us on another geospatial webinar. Thanks again from all of us. Bye-bye. And remember to tell a friend about Directions Magazine. Take care.